UNVALLEY, the show for leaders who want to unlock their full potential and plug into the biggest opportunities in tech and startups beyond Silicon Valley. I'm your host, Matt Hunkler, and I have my co-host, Nate Spangle, with me today. Say hello, Nate.
Matt, what's up? My grandma always said I had a face for radio, so it makes sense that podcasting would be a career choice for me.
Well, it works, except this is a video podcast, so I'm glad you at least combed your hair today.
There we go.
Well, today this is a very special episode because we're kind of in between things right now. Bridging the gap for you listeners, watchers, if you're watching the YouTube or video version of this podcast, because we did this podcast for a long time, more than 3 years, but then we stopped around 2020, around March of 2020. Some big things happened around that time frame, you might recall. But we started this podcast back in late 2016. Things really took off for us in 2017 when we launched Powder Keg. The show was originally called Powder Keg, Igniting Startups. But what we're launching here starting next week is the reboot of the Powder Keg podcast, but we're relaunching it as UNVALLEY. And the reason we're relaunching it as UNVALLEY is that kind of helps frame what it is that we're doing here at Powder Keg. We think of UNVALLEY as sort of the unbundling of Silicon Valley. And that's certainly what the last couple of years has done for the tech industry. Nate, I know you've seen it in the Powder Keg community and all the people you interact with there. We've seen it in the way people and companies are hiring. We see it in the way investors are investing. We're going to get into all of that here today on the show. So what we're going to do for you is actually share a little bit of the research that we've been seeing, some of the trends we've been seeing, but also tell you the story of Powder Keg, because UNVALLEY is brought to you by Powder Keg. And Powder Keg is really focused on companies and their executives in the ever-expanding tech communities beyond Silicon Valley. But what Powder Keg has become is the only private member network focused on supporting tech companies and leaders in fast-growing communities beyond Silicon Valley. But we want to tell you how we got there. So I figured we could just dive in and sort of bridge the gap for you. Does that sound good to you, Nate?
Absolutely. Give me a history lesson.
All right, cool. So Nate joined the team here at Powder Keg over a year ago. He's been with us through some pretty exciting times here, coming out of the tail end of the pandemic lockdown. And we've seen some incredible growth with the community since then. But pre-pandemic, there were some interesting things happening. And I already mentioned one of them, which is when we launched the podcast, the Powder Keg podcast, that is, Igniting Startups, back in 2020. We got some really nice early validation from the tech industry. And I wanted to share my screen here really quickly and show you a couple of these things. One of them is this article that Matt Mayberry wrote, 24 Best Podcasts for Entrepreneurs in 2017. And a lot of podcasts you might recognize here in addition to Powder Keg Igniting Startups, Entrepreneur on Fire. But Powder Keg Igniting Startups was one of the first 5 podcasts mentioned here, along with, the Jocko podcast, the Tim Ferriss show, some of these podcasts that were still pretty early in their journey and now are just massive podcasts. And then we also had a really nice article right up in Forbes in 2018, early 2018, on the heels of that entrepreneur article, calling us one of the podcasts that was getting it right. And we saw that, we saw a ton of growth in the community here at Powder Keg. We had a very big listenership. We have now over 200,000 downloads to date for the show, which is fantastic. But what we're looking to do is really build on that momentum and bring it back in a way that really honors our community and honors the growth that we're seeing in what we call the UNVALLEY, or the area beyond Silicon Valley, where we're seeing just these massive upticks in growth. Both in VC funding, in number of companies being launched, and in general talent pool that's growing in these communities. And so want to share a little bit about what we learned there. And I'm going to bring up a deck that's kind of our overview deck just as a added visual to kind of show you some of what we were doing in all of these communities around the country and how things shifted for us into the all virtual remote world that at least is still very remote first now in the tech industry. Sound good to you, Nate?
Yeah, for those of you listening on the podcast, we will use very good descriptive words so that you can visualize what we're looking at here.
That's perfect. And if this is your first episode that you're listening to, I am Matt Hunkler. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Powder Keg. Started Powder Keg prior to the pandemic on the heels of running a pretty large tech community that kind of traversed lots of different time zones and geographies, had more than 10,000 members. And then prior to that, ran content at some of the bigger social platforms. I can tell a little bit about that as I tell the story here. But Nate joined the team. I actually met Nate through LinkedIn, but also we were both part of an entrepreneurial fellowship called the OR Fellowship. Nate, maybe you can share how you first heard about Powder Keg, even before I reached out to you, and what made you decide to join the team.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So I came to Indy back in 2019 and was looking to get more plugged into, I didn't even know if it would be a tech community, but just more plugged into the business community is what I kind of wanted to become a part of. And I was directed to go to this quote unquote badass networking event is what they call it. And I was like, I don't know if networking events can be quote unquote badass, but it's like, whatever. I'm a guy that says yes to a lot of things. So I show up and first thing I realize is this is not the typical event. There's no suits. There's no ties. It's at the Vogue Theater, which is a concert venue here in Indianapolis for anyone who's familiar. And 3 incredible startup founders get on stage and pitch their company. And as well as there's some other presentations of cool things happening throughout the community. People are having fun. And honestly, it was just an incredible experience as I sat in the back of the theater thinking, oh my gosh, like one day it'd be so cool to be a part of this team and to get on that stage one day. And fast forward, 3.5 years later, here we are on a podcast.
Here we are. And we actually did a very special in-between episode last month. So if you want to go back and check out the previous episode of this podcast to hear Nate's debut on the Powder Keg stage and hear from 5 entrepreneurs who presented on stage that evening, you can definitely do that. But we were really fortunate to bring Nate on the team here as our head of community. As head of community, he is talking to tons of entrepreneurs, tons of tech executives around the country, and just really great individual contributors and people who are plugged into the tech ecosystems around the country. So super glad to have his perspective here on the show. And I think that's going to be really critical as we launch UNVALLEY.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I will share with you a little bit of perspective. So a lot has changed at Powder Keg since we were last consistently doing this podcast, but there are certainly some things that have not changed. And one of those things is that Powder Keg is still your locally driven, nationally connected tech community. But we're positioned in the market just a little bit differently. And I'll start by kind of telling you what it is that we're doing right now, and then I'll tell you how we got there. The way we talk about Powder Keg today is Powder Keg is the only private member network focused on supporting tech companies and executives in communities beyond Silicon Valley. And this is really important because there's no other organization that's focused on this particular persona, this particular person. And there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of them across the country. Yeah, there are literally hundreds of thousands of them across the country here in the U.S. alone. And currently, Powder Keg is specifically focused on the United States, but we do have plans to expand globally as we continue to grow this community here. But the way we got here is actually Powder Keg started in Indianapolis, and it really got its momentum with my previous company that I started and grown. This was an organic grassroots community. Originally, we called it Hackers and Founders. That grew organically here in Indy. We then took on our own name here in Indianapolis and helped kind of grow from the ground up with a lot of the tech organizations and tech companies and communities like Raleigh-Durham, Cincinnati. And for those watching the video version of the podcast here, you can see photos from our Nashville events, from our Kansas City events, from our Denver events. As you might imagine, we put on a lot of miles traveling around the country and plugging into these tech ecosystems. But as all of these tech ecosystems grew, the organizations that were kind of homegrown and acting as that front door of the community, really what Powder Keg was doing when we first launched here in Indianapolis, those organizations kind of took root and could be those sort of front doors in that local geography. And now that things have shifted, Powder Keg serves much more of a connective tissue across those organizations and companies and people in all of these fast-growing communities. And so the big shift to remote work changed a lot of things. First of all, the shift to remote work created a ton of opportunity, but it also created some really big problems. First and foremost, these emerging tech communities are growing, they're fragmented, and they're distinct from Silicon Valley. I think that's something really important to call out here, just because for those who don't live in one of these communities, those who aren't traveling, day to day going to all of these different markets, which I had the privilege of doing for more than a decade, kind of saw some consistent patterns. And the biggest one, I think, is that professionals lack connections and guides to navigate these new networks of opportunity beyond the Bay Area. There's just not a consistent place where you can go and find maps and paths into all of these great communities and companies and different networks. The other big challenge is that employers, one, they can hire from anywhere now, which means their talent pool is bigger than it ever has been because most tech companies have moved to a remote first or at least a hybrid work environment. But as a result, employers are also competing for talent more than ever because everyone is your competition, not just employers in your own backyard. And then finally, leaders can kind of feel like they're on an island when it comes to growing their team, their company, and their career. And this is particularly true in these UNVALLEY tech ecosystems. And so a lot of what we're doing here on the show with UNVALLEY is helping share the stories of some of those leaders, helping share some of the really great insights, tactics, strategies, and the stories to inspire further growth for those leaders. And I think we've just got a huge opportunity to connect people in this single community and this national tech community that is Powder Keg. So I'll pause there because, Nate, I'd love to hear some of your context, just having talked to so many of our members over the last year, 12 months, 18 months. What are you seeing on the ground in terms of some of these shifts with navigating these networks of opportunity, competing for talent, learning and continuing to accelerate their careers in tech?
Yeah, one thing that I'm seeing is it's very difficult to find those companies across the country that have a great culture that you want to be a part of, that really invest into their employees. Like, I could be a software developer in Indianapolis, and I might previously gone to in-person events and found out about the companies that were in my backyard. But now all of a sudden I can work for a company in Kansas City, in Lincoln, Nebraska. And you ask them, what's the number one tech company in Lincoln, Nebraska, Matt? It's heck, a lot of people don't know. And if you Google it, you're more than likely shopped out to the highest Google ad bidder, or you see a Google, an Amazon, a Facebook, and all these companies that are already getting all the press and all the coverage there. So it's been really fun helping people discover new opportunities at tech companies that they may have never heard of before, as well as just hearing about the stories that what entrepreneurs are doing, in Denver. In Miami and Austin are now, they're pretty hot, but when I first started, they were still growing, and it was cool to kind of see that transition and talk to founders that were down there and what strategies they have and what they were doing to grow their company and to attract talent. So it's just been super cool to see that and see the tech ecosystem kind of shrink in a way where you can be connected with people in Denver and people in Austin and people in Raleigh, Durham, and not need to travel there and put those decade worth of miles on your car like you did, Matt.
Yeah, that good thing too. Good thing. I'm really glad Powder Keg exists, so you, the listener, don't have to necessarily put hundreds of thousands of miles on your car or your Southwest card, because I was definitely flying with the buddy pass with my now wife as I was traveling the country previously. But I definitely miss the in-person component of what we do, and we actually brought it back in some pretty interesting ways, and we're starting to bring that back in some of our communities we can get into later. But I wanted to share a couple of numbers here that I think are pretty fascinating. To your point, Nate, we just saw incredible growth in the UNVALLEY. And a big piece of that is due in part to just the record level of funding that we saw in 2020 and then again in 2021. Startups raked in, you can read this headline right now, I have up on the screen. Bloomberg headline reads, startups raked in $621 billion in 2021 in funding, shattering funding records. And the subheadline is, cities outside of Silicon Valley show growing promise as tech hubs, which is so kind of them to say that we show growing promise. The UNVALLEY is now the fastest growing segment of the fastest growing industry. Because when you dive in a little bit deeper, which it looks like maybe Bloomberg didn't do on this particular article, I have a graph up right now that shows just how the Bay Area share of seed and early stage US VC dollars has decreased over the last decade from up near 40% back in 2011 to now down to less than 30%, 27.2% in 2021 in terms of the share of VC dollars. That means that Bay Area investment outside of the Bay Area, New York and Boston, and overall VC investment is growing faster beyond the Bay Area. So the second chart shows that Bay Area investment outside of the Bay Area, New York and Boston, the share of those venture dollars is growing in the UNVALLEY at like leaps and bounds. This is an up and to the right hockey stick graph showing the VC investment. And then this last chart, and I promise this is not going to be an all data podcast, Nate. I know you're not a numbers guy, but
come on now, I'm a data scientist, resident powder keg data scientist right here.
Nate recently learned how to write the HTML in our newsletter, so he's claimed that he is the data scientist at Powder Keg, which Rick, our CTO, who's actually a data scientist, finds hilarious. But this last chart, Nate, you're going to love this. Fundraising activity outside of the Bay Area, New York and Boston hit historic records last year, and it is on pace to do so again this year. Not only have the number of funds increased, but meaning the number of like VC funds formed to invest beyond the Bay Area, New York and Boston, but even Bay Area capital raised, more and more of it is going into the UNVALLEY. So just some pretty big shifts. And this, again, as I mentioned, created these big problems. People lack the guides. Employers are competing for talent more than ever. And then at the same time, leaders can kind of feel like they're on an island. And we've been solving problems like this for years, even before the pandemic, when we were doing a lot of things in person. We were doing workshops, we were creating content, we were helping share this at scale. But now I've taken kind of all of my experience building that startup community for the last 12 years prior to starting Powder Keg, and then of course doing a ton of content. So I previously worked for Cha-Cha, which was a top 50 website on the internet in terms of content, and then spun out an influencer marketing platform from there. And then also just covered tech between the coasts for Forbes and Inc. and did a little bit for VentureBeat. And then, of course, we launched this podcast to do that as well. But what has really changed at Powder Keg is as things shifted and we moved to remote work, we brought on Rick Worley as our CTO. And Rick is just an awesome character. We should have him on the podcast sometime, Nate. But Rick is, to use your term, Nate, Rick is a badass. He built the first job board on the internet, which became Monster.com, where he led engineering for the first decade, and then actually more than a decade. Then he became the VP of product at the largest U.S. employment network called Direct Employers. And when we reconnected with Rick, he was part of kind of our original community we formed 12 years ago, more than 12 years ago. But when we reconnected with Rick as our advisor, he was doing data science consulting for a number of the high growth tech companies here in Indianapolis, and I think even nationally. So he brought all of that knowledge to Powder Keg. And now with the platform that we've built, we have more than 10,000 engaged professionals, and more than half of those are either executives or investors. So kind of more senior level community. We have more than 4,000 companies in the network, and you can check that all out on powderkeg.com. You can sort by company size, industry, geography, you name it. You can explore all of those companies and all the jobs at those companies. And then we've got dozens of partners throughout the U.S. So big companies like CDW, funds like Rise of the Rest that I went on tour with from at least a half dozen times around the country. But then also all of our local ecosystems like Centrifuge in Cincinnati and Launch Tennessee and Nashville and Chattanooga and some of the other Tennessee tech ecosystems, American Underground in Raleigh, Durham, and Galvanize down in Denver and Boulder. And this really helps create a really great tech ecosystem in all of these markets. But what we've built at PowderKeg is what we believe is the best way to build momentum and become known in fast-growing communities. And this is the message that has really been resonating, and we've been successful with helping our customers be successful at as we've grown this private member network. And I want to pause there, Nate, because you've been along for the ride with this journey as we've kind of found this product market fit with PowderKeg. And I'm curious what some of the highlights were for you just in the last year and a half as we've kind of gone from almost like a talent-only platform to then realizing our customers were using PowderKeg to do other things like attract capital and land customers and grow their brand, not just their employer brand, but just overall.
Yeah, I think the one thing that's been fun to see the shift in is that like a lot of what our product and what the community is doing was already happening like in our email inboxes. Like being part of a good community means that like if your friend loses a job, you introduce them to your network, right? And you do more than just like their post or support it on LinkedIn. It's like, hey, I know XYZ who's hiring. How about it? Would you be interested in introduction there? And now like one, I get paid to work at a company where like making introductions is one of like the leading indicators for success. Like that's pretty fun, like that's like trying to like over Thanksgiving, I was trying to explain that to my grandma and still not quite clicking with her, but she supports me whatever I do. But it's just like been cool to see that where it's like, been able to help people get connected to like future jobs at companies that they really enjoy, right? Helping, I remember I was on a thread where you introduced someone and they got like a $50,000 investment into their startup, like that's like meaningful impact. That's community driven. That like is what I think like good people do automatically, right? Like if you are a good person, you're willing to share that social capital, you're willing to share your network and like do so in a meaningful way. And I think that's what like kind of the bones of a good community is like people willing to give as much as they receive. And it's cool to have like a platform that helps aid that and helps make that come to life. So that's been one of the coolest shifts over the past 18 months that I've seen, where stuff is getting out of just Matt's email inbox that has to, I don't know how he would ever get that thing to zero. I'm sure he gets a million emails a day, but like more driven by technology solutions. Like that's been cool to see.
I agree. And it's been fun to see. It basically feels like I have an Iron Man suit now because I can say, hey, this is perfect for this part of our product. Go check it out. And then they get connected to more people than I could have possibly done on my own, because now we're not only using Matt's network and Nate's network and Rick's network and Meg's network, we're using the PowderKeg community's network. And to your point, Nate, we have a freaking awesome community. Like the culture of the PowderKeg ecosystem is very much give first. And I love that about it. And I think that's why it's been successful and has grown over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. Like maybe 30 minutes before we recorded this podcast, I was on a call with an ex-Instagram and Airbnb employee who's exploring what it's like to work in tech in Indianapolis. And it was just like the way that she was speaking about Indy and the community here and wanting to get more plugged in was just like, wow, there's something special cooking here in the 317, as well as like cities like Nashville, cities like Cincinnati. And it's just cool to see like these companies that work at or these individuals that work at legacy tech companies like the Instagrams, like the Facebooks, like the Airbnb. They're starting to explore what life's like in the Midwest, and what these tech communities here in outside of the Bay Area look like. So it was validating to, I'm not a data guy, but like that conversation that I have, I'm more of a people guy. That conversation validated what Matt's data showed a little bit ago.
Well, and to your point, Nate, it's really cool because sure, Austin and Miami have probably grown faster than some of these other markets, but it's, being in those markets too as PowderKeg and connecting them to places like Denver and Raleigh and Boise, Idaho, like some of these really cool tech ecosystems has been awesome. And, we're still connecting people to Bay Area capital and Bay Area talent and other Bay Area companies that they want to co-sell with. It is this idea of unbundling Silicon Valley from a geography and saying, Silicon Valley really is more of a mindset, and it's very much in the cloud. And that's a big part of what we're doing on this show is like, let's take those strategies that worked. Let's leave the stuff that maybe didn't work about Silicon Valley, and let's apply it to some of these other amazing resources that we have, which is these tech hubs with amazing quality of life and just incredible pockets of talent and industries that have been around for centuries in some cases.
Absolutely. And it's so cool to like help empower those founders outside of the Bay Area. Like they no longer have to fly out to San Francisco and do the whole Sandhill shuffle and like try to like, meet in person and do that whole thing where now it's happening via Zoom. It's happening via LinkedIn. It's happening via the Powder Keg community and the introduction tools that we're helping introduce to founders all across the country.
I like the phrase Sandhill Shuffle. Did you just invent that? That's good.
I was watching an episode of Silicon Valley that was called the Sandhill Shuffle.
There you go.
They go out and they pitch all the companies. If you haven't watched that, it's a pretty good one for tech employees out there.
All right. We'll link up a clip in the show notes for this episode so people can check out Sandhill Shuffle on YouTube. That's great. All right. I'd love to kind of share how we're helping companies do that, build momentum and become known in these fast growing communities, because our team has been doing some awesome work with our community. Like we built this with our community of over 10,000 members, and we could not have done it without you, listener. Thank you. If you are one of the people that gave us feedback or gave us an idea, all of our best ideas come from our members. But the three.
Whoa.
Oh, go ahead.
As resident idea guy, I might take offense to that.
It's true, Nate. Our members have the best ideas.
They have the best. Okay, best is relative, but like craziest ideas, I think that I'm going to put myself up for that nomination.
You definitely wear the crown in terms of craziest ideas. I'll give you that.
Absolutely.
You can oversee your kingdom of crazy ideas.
That is me.
So the way that Powder Keg has now kind of figured out how we can help people and companies build momentum and become known is kind of threefold. First and foremost, we need to help build reputation. Because all of these tech ecosystems beyond the Bay Area are beyond the Bay Area, media does not cover them as much. There is not as much connective tissue, at least from a local geography standpoint. All of the tech media is either in the Bay Area or potentially in New York City. There's just not big tech blogs, big tech media publications that are operating in the UNVALLEY. And so we've built some tools for people to share their thought leadership, which is awesome because we're helping tie people not only to some of these topics that are maybe geographically relevant, but also just nationally relevant in their industry for their scale of company, for the type of company or the type of talent they're looking to attract. And so we've built this platform with what we call kind of a product-led SEO strategy, which means as more members join the ecosystem, more people start their free profile on Powder Keg or set up a new profile for a community, or start their own personal profile, those people and companies and organizations and communities get added to collections. And those collections lead to other topics that are related to them. And all of these topics already rank. We rank for over 12,000 high traffic key phrases. And forgive me because I geek out on this stuff because in a former life, this is what I did, at Cha-Cha and at another company called relevance.com and Slingshot SEO. And I had a SEO agency back in college that I sold before I came to Indianapolis. So I think there's just so much power there to help plug in executives to these topics that people are searching for and surfacing them as the thought leaders they are, because our members are building, $1 billion+ businesses. They're some of the fastest growing companies. And a lot of times they're doing it with less funding than their Bay Area competitors. And so that's why there's just this huge opportunity. both for investors, but also for people looking to plug into job opportunities. So with Powder Keg, executives can engage their supporters, grow their brand awareness. We've had awards going now throughout all of the pandemic from a national standpoint. And in 2023, we're going to be doing geographic specific awards, taking our national awards and creating geographic specific versions of them, helping people explore, the best health tech companies, the best companies with a 4-day work week, the fastest growing startup companies, companies with the best sales jobs. We definitely tapped into Rick's data science skills and captured millions of data points across tens of thousands of companies to get the very best companies into the Powder Keg database and rank them in their respective industry and soon to be geography as well. So just an awesome opportunity, both for the companies and the executives, but also for the people looking to kind of plug into those companies. And Nate, I know you've done a lot of connecting people to award-winning companies, jobs at award-winning companies, even some funding to some of these award-winning companies. Maybe you could speak to a little bit some of what you're seeing just in terms of the reaction to people who are kind of exploring some of these jobs and companies.
Oh, absolutely. Like it's fun to be able to get in there and work with Rick on his data science aspect of like what's making these award-winning companies so special and why are people loving them. And I think the one thing that is special about what we're doing is also bringing in the cultural component, right? So learning about what it's really like to work at these companies versus like you get on a few other websites, you look at some reviews, you see that maybe like somebody, just because one person has a bad experience doesn't mean that everyone will or that it's a bad company. And really helping make those connections based on what a candidate's looking for and what a company offers. So it's been great to help introduce those to community members. It's been great to celebrate. Obviously, we had an awards ceremony early in 2022 and had a bunch of award-winning companies there. And everyone loves to, get on stage and brag a little bit about what they're doing well. So it's been cool. And it's also been fun that like, you could be award-winning companies in the same category. It doesn't mean that one's doing it better. It just could be a different strategy that's making them a best company for work-life balance and like what their strategy is to make sure their employees aren't working 100-hour weeks and how they're helping them have that balance in their life. So it's definitely been a fun time and has opened my eyes to so many tech companies across the country that I had no idea existed, which is always fun.
It's fun. It's fun to find those hidden gems that you're just like, wait, what is this company doing? Like, at what scale? That's insane. And you reminded me, Nate, that these awards kind of came out of the key product insight in our community that was true pre-pandemic and has held true throughout the last several years. And that insight is that the number one reason experienced tech professionals join a tech company is also the same reason that they leave a tech company. And to your point, Nate, yes, pen drop moment. I see you dropping the pen there. Yep. The mic drop moment. The reason that people join or quit a tech company is company culture. It all comes back to company culture. And that is not something that you can market your way around. It really starts with leadership and getting your core values and your mission. And those things can absolutely change. But ultimately, it's the company culture and then the resulting employer brand, because as the famous entrepreneur and a friend of mine, Tony Hsieh, the late Tony Hsieh, used to say, brand is just a lagging indicator of company culture, which is absolutely true. Your brand is a direct, it's basically just an echo in the market of what your company culture is. And I freaking love that.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, that guy was smart. Brilliant man. Let me dive back in here and show you a little bit more. I got two more things to show you here. In addition to helping build reputation, we've built some software that helps our members connect with the best thought leaders, industry builders, product builders. We've really built something that is a SaaS workflow that helps our members create what we call double opt-in intros. And Nate knows this. Double opt-in introductions is kind of our North Star product metric. And what that means is any good introduction is kind of two parties. And in those two parties, there's one person who wants to talk to the other person. And we want to make sure before we make the introduction that other person is actually going to find the conversation valuable. So we've built a SaaS workflow that makes it really easy for our members to say, hey, I think it'd be really great if I talked to this person. And here's why I think that they would enjoy talking to me and exploring what I'm working on. And we built this originally for our verified available candidate pool. These are just extremely talented members in the powder keg community who are quietly exploring their next career opportunities. Not necessarily our premium members, but are just members of this community. They're people who listen to this podcast, are subscribed to our newsletter, which, side note, you can always subscribe to at powderkeg.com/newsletter. But we started with this verified available candidate pool, and now we've taken that same SaaS workflow and applied it to our investor database and our vetted executive network, which includes those 4,000 plus companies in our network. So that's really cool because, as Nate mentioned, it's so rewarding to see two people get introduced. It's even more rewarding when you hear, a couple weeks later that person got hired, or that person invested in that company, or that person partnered with this other company and now they're working together. Just so many great things have come out of this, and it's really allowed us to get out of the email inbox here at Powder Keg and get out of the way of our members so that they can connect with one another in a way that's actually value add and isn't just some sort of, spray and pray, lead generation tool. And don't get me wrong, those things,
Such animosity.
yeah, those things have their place. I realize I said that with such disdain.
Yes.
But you know what I'm talking about, Nate. Maybe you can provide some other context here, Nate, from what you're seeing in the community.
The great part about double opt introductions is that you're gonna get a valuable experience out of it, because there is this overarching, like, I'm a powder keg community member that ties you all together. And that's what's the difference between like a LinkedIn where people spray and pray, like, I'd love to pick your brain for 15 minutes on XYZ thing. Like, it could be a good message, but people just like don't want to accept those and like can't give up 15 minutes of time to every single person who asks for it. Whereas within the powder keg community, that there's some stickiness, especially our executive community. Like, these are award-winning companies for the most part. Like, they're coming together as like leaders in this UNVALLEY movement, and there's a good synergy there. So when they're using the SaaS workflow to connect with each other, it's going to be a meaningful conversation. And the acceptance rate is, I don't have data because I'm not the data guy, but it's statistically significant, the acceptance rate versus a traditional lead generation tool.
Yes, statistically significant. I love that. Nailed it, data scientist. I agree. It is the way we're seeing a ton of adoption here, and I think it's because it's spinning it's kind of flipping the pendulum in the other direction of where the market has gone the last decade, with kind of cold email outreach being the way people think they can grow their brand and sales pipeline. And if you've been in the industry this long, you see those open rates, you see those response rates, you see those meeting book rates, those close rates all have, just gone off a cliff the last decade because of how saturated it has got with noise. And what we're doing at Powder Keg is really trying to be the antithesis of noise, high signal, low noise.
Yeah. And I would say even from like a candidate and talent perspective, right? Like, everyone knows, like, the number one way, in my opinion, from what I've seen, to get a job is to get introduced to who's going to be the hiring, like a direct introduction, and helping like make that more community oriented, where people are introducing me to their friends and colleagues that may have like been a part of a riff or a layoff recently, and they're saying, hey, so-and-so is a rock star. Like, do you know anyone in the powder keg community? And I'll jump on and talk to that community member, just like the person I was just talking to from Instagram and Airbnb, and they're like, hey, this person really is a rock star. So when I go and talk to XYZ hiring manager in the community, it's like they're vetted and they're sticky and they're part of the community, and it's valuable.
That's the magic, right? It's got to be valuable. And I know we're going to continue to find ways to create features that create even better signal to noise ratios as we go on and on. But I think a lot of the magic is in the curation on the front end. And I think that only happens because we've got a strong culture in our community here. So
Amen.
really just hat tip to all of our members who are listening here. I want to share this last piece of what we've kind of built out because I'm really excited about it. We've introduced some new things here in the last several months. The last kind of value prop is just growing valuable relationships. And we all know how valuable relationships are in growing your career. I would say it's the X factor. It's the way to cross-pollinate ideas. It's the way to cross-pollinate networks. It's how you get qualified referrals. And we've built some features into the platform for that. But we've brought back events in a pretty interesting way as well, both in-person events through partnerships locally, like the one we have here in Indiana with Elevate Ventures, which, by the way, is the most active venture capital fund in the Great Lakes region, invested in hundreds of tech companies over the last several years. But then we're also introducing virtual events back into the mix. So actually how UNVALLEY got its name is we started doing these big virtual conferences back in 2020. Thousands of people attended these throughout 2020, 2021. And what we found is that far and away, the executives were getting tons of value out of these. And we're going to be bringing back virtual events in January of 2023, but in kind of a different way, kind of a more focused and, again, curated sort of way. So stay tuned for that because you're going to get to hear more of that. In fact, we'll share some of those best virtual event snippets right here on the Powder Keg podcast. But the last piece of this is we've built some marketing tech that I think is kind of unique, the way we've applied it here. And that is, we've created these company culture profiles, for, as I mentioned, more than 4,000 companies have a profile on Powder Keg, and you can go check them all out. But we specifically built it to help show what makes this company and this product unique. And what's unique about Powder Keg is not only that, it's an employer-friendly tool where people who actually work at the company share what it's like working at that company. And, we, of course, have data points on what tech stack is being used. And, of course, we have data on what all the jobs are at that company. But when you follow one of our member companies on Powder Keg, something's happens that's kind of different than other platforms. What will happen is you'll actually get an email from Nate. Nate will send you an email after you follow this company, sharing an interesting video from that CEO or tech leader. Then maybe a day later, maybe a week later, you might get a testimonial and a sizzle reel that you wouldn't find anywhere else. You might see a customer advocate video, might see an employee talking about what it's like to work there. And then as these people in the company contribute to the thought leadership, as a follower of each of these companies, you will get that information first. So you actually get to keep tabs on the leaders at each of these tech companies so that as you might be looking to explore your next adventure or looking to invest in your next company or looking to partner with another company, you kind of have that inside scoop and you've gotten to know this company over time. And we're finding that our member companies that are using this, they're using it to, of course, all of our companies have a CRM and an ATS platform, and those are used to move deals forward. CRM being customer relationship management platform, ATS meaning applicant tracking system for hiring. Those are for moving the deals forward. And the way we've built this product at Powder Keg is our persistent sort of third-party endorsements help elevate each of those companies' brands. And that's not something I'm seeing in other marketplaces. So this is probably our most category creation, quote unquote, feature that we have on the platform. But we're seeing it being used across our membership to engage talent. We're seeing it being used to nurture relationship and build ARR momentum with, sales prospects, with potential partners. And we're seeing it to connect and engage and stay up to date with investors as well. So it's just a cool opportunity, and I'm excited about what we're doing here right now at Powder Keg because we're seeing that across our membership, from new hires and customers to conversions and investments, our community, our global communities here at Powder Keg and the resource networks deliver consistently. And Nate, you're a big part of that magic here at Powder Keg. So definitely want to give you a huge shout out for the work you're doing, behind the scenes, of the tech platform and, in front of the scenes of the tech platform as well. But it's been really cool to kind of turn this corner into a private member network specifically for executives, because now we're seeing, half dozen or so new customers every single week. Last few weeks, we're definitely seeing some momentum and growth in the community that has continued throughout, since we last consistently did this podcast in 2020. And I'm really excited to bring some of those stories out from behind the paywall of Powder Keg and share them with you, folks who are interested in the UNVALLEY.
Absolutely. Love that. And on the topic of sharing stories, Matt gave me in our pre kind of preparation for the podcast, he wanted a fun community segment. So I went out to some of our executive members, Matt, and I have a rapid fire lightning round of questions and stories from the Powder Keg archives. All right. So first of all, I want to point people, after you subscribe to the Powder Keg podcast the Powder Keg channel on YouTube, make sure you go check out Matt Hunkler's personal channel on YouTube. There are some 10-year plus videos of pitch ideas that are spectacular. So if you want to see some of those original events and the pitches that were done there, go check out Matt Hunkler on YouTube. It's phenomenal. I could spend hours there just seeing, a decade ago, there's founders from across the UNVALLEY making some great pitches and some wild ideas. But I went out to the community, the executive community, and I got
a lot of those. I will say a lot of those companies have since been created, scaled, and acquired. So there are actually some really cool from the vault videos on that channel. So I can't believe you found those, but those are great.
I'm a grade A social media stalker. I could find anything out about anyone that's on the internet. So with that being said,
incriminate yourself.
Yeah, right. We curated some rapid fire lightning round questions about the Powder Keg archives. So I want to start with Matt. We're talking in terms of in-person physical events. Best food in the city where you've hosted a Powder Keg event.
Oh wow! Well, I got to give a shout out to Nameless Catering, who came up with us here in the indie tech community. They consistently have great food. And anytime I can have Nameless do our events, it is consistently the best catered food. But wow, the barbecue is just legit. I think we hosted a pitch competition at South by one year, and I think that day I made it over to oh my gosh, now I'm blanking on it in Austin.
Harry Black's?
Franklin's, yes, Franklin's is delicious, and I watched the masterclass from the pit master there, so I've learned how to do poor man's brisket, but that brisket is beyond measure. It is just off the charts delicious. Okay. Franklin's,
right? We'll give that Franklin's barbecue, South by Southwest, Austin. Great choice. Fun. Next one. Coolest venue that you've hosted a Powder Keg event.
Oh, you're catching me off guard. My memory with names is terrible, but there is a historic church in Memphis, Tennessee. We did a pitch competition there with Rise of the Rest. It is a historic church because it was a really big part of the civil rights movement, and a lot of the protests were organized there. And I am not remembering the name off the top of my head, but it was a very cool, very different venue than anywhere you could possibly imagine. But I've hosted some events in some very weird venues. All
right, I love that. Okay,
we'll save those for a future episode.
Absolutely, we might be able to find that church in Memphis, and we'll link it up in the show notes. Next, just overall funnest Powder Keg event you've ever had. Most fun, laughs, just like best time. Give it to me.
I'm going to have to go with the one that we're having next Wednesday. Like, I can already tell it's going to be the best. We're going to have more than 100 executives from around the Midwest there in person in our offices at 16 Tech in downtown Indianapolis. I'm looking forward to it. But,
the best is
that might be recency bias and just the fact that I always live in the future to a fault sometimes. So I'm going to have to say the best one was the one that's happening next week.
Perfect. And then final rapid fire lightning round question. We have, give me a time at an event that you've hosted. I'm going to say hosted, that you've been starstruck. Who was it? When were you starstruck?
I'm always impressed by the people on the powder keg stage. Starstruck, for whatever reason, that doesn't really happen to me.
Humble brag. That doesn't get starstruck.
I always just see people as people, and I know that even the biggest celebrities, whether it's Mark Cuban or Tony Hsieh, I would say Mark Cuban is probably the time I felt most off my game. So I'll tell a quick anecdote here, which was I met Mark Cuban, kind of hosted a little Shark Tank watching party here in Indianapolis for Mark when he was staying, downtown at one of the nice hotels, and just reached out on email, got something set up to do a Shark Tank watch party in the hotel bar. And so I got to meet Mark, who's an IU alum, which is where I went to school. So he spent time down in Bloomington, Indiana. That was the connection there. And we were watching Shark Tank, which was great. It was, come on, got to watch Shark Tank with Mark Cuban. That's amazing. But Mark said, okay, so give me the pitch. What's your company do? I said, hey man, I've got nothing to pitch you. I just wanted to give people an opportunity to meet you, and just thought it'd be cool for you to see kind of what is happening here in the Indiana and Midwest tech ecosystem since you started your, broadcast.com down at IU. And he was like, total fail. An entrepreneur should always have a pitch ready to go. And I think he's right. He was absolutely right. I should have had some sort of ask. It's freaking Mark Cuban. He's a billionaire, and massively well connected. And at that point in time in my career, I was kind of I'm never going to ask something for someone on the first meet ever. I'm always going to look to give first, and I did it to a fault. And so that's my lesson learned. And probably, I don't know if I would say starstruck, but I would say I was a dummy in front of a really massive star.
Hey, happens to the best of us, Matt. Happens to the best of us. Well, that's all I have for the rapid fire lightning round. But for the listeners out there, if you would like to be included in a future rapid fire lightning round where we ask our Matt and or our guests fun, interesting questions, please keep them lighthearted and fun. That's what makes it's great, and we get real stories. Hit me up on LinkedIn, Nate Spangle. We'd love to share your stories, and we'll just share your questions to pull out fun stories from our guests. And look forward to future rapid fire lightning rounds.
Love it, Nate. I love that idea. And thanks for doing an impromptu. You definitely caught me off guard. And I think we got some good stories there. Thank you for tuning in. We will officially launch UNVALLEY next week with some really great episodes that we're bringing to you, some really big names in tech. So I really hope you tune in. In the meantime, if you could leave us a review, if you could share this, if you could subscribe on whatever platform, Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, or even if you don't listen to podcasts, just subscribe to it. It helps us get the word out there about the UNVALLEY and what's going on in these awesome tech communities beyond Silicon Valley. It is a movement, and it's only a movement that is growing if you're a part of it and help share what's going on here. So thank you so much for tuning in. We want to build this with you, so please leave us feedback. If it's negative feedback, we prefer you not do that in your iTunes review or your podcast review. Just shoot us an email, matt@powderkeg.com, nate@powderkeg.com. That's literally our email addresses. We talk to hundreds of community members every single day, and we'd love to hear from you. UNVALLEY is brought to you by Powder Keg, which is the locally driven, nationally connected tech community. And as I shared earlier in the show, Powder Keg is now the only private member network focused on supporting tech companies and executives in communities beyond Silicon Valley. So be sure to visit powderkeg.com/premium if you are an executive or a leader at a tech company. Again, that's powderkeg.com/premium. And you can apply there to be considered for membership. We would love to talk to you regardless, even if it's not the right fit right now. we can still get you plugged into some of the other executive members, some of the companies. And if you're looking for a job in tech, working with one of our PowderKeg Premium members, powderkeg.com/jobs is a great place to start. Thanks for tuning in to UNVALLEY, the show for leaders who want to unlock their full potential and plug into the biggest opportunities in tech and startups beyond Silicon Valley. Again, I was your host, Matt Hunkler, our co-host, Nate Spangle, head of community at PowderKeg. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on UNVALLEY.